What's going on, guys? It's Belton here, back with another video. We're going to do something a little bit different today. Instead of the traditional video that I've been doing where we demonstrate a bunch of different techniques and how you can make currency, today I'm going to talk about something a little bit different that I believe actually is far more important. And that is like the psychology and the mentality behind success in this game. The things that will make you successful, wealthy, on a habitual basis that happen prior to even opening the game, and mentality and mindset that you should adapt. Now, I've also noticed that recently, I'm checking the analytics on the videos, I'm losing about 30% of you in the first 30 seconds here. And now that I'm on the other side of having someone finish in 30 seconds and leave, not a great position. So, since I had a bunch of primer grading lenses left here, I thought just before we get into it, we can do a little, I don't want to say gamble here, but calculated risk taking. At the end of the video, I'll go over the specifics on this. Five divines, 10 divines, 15 divines, 20 divines, 25 divines, and 30 divines. $35 divines, 39 divines, 43 divines, 46 divines, and we spent 30. So we just made 16 divines there. But regardless, that was just sort of grab your attention, and because I had them lying around, thought it'd be a little bit fun. Go on the specifics at the end of that. But again, today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. And so the format for this, guys, I'm going to actually read basically the introduction and the preface that I've written on my website, thehideouthandbook.com, because I think it does give a good overview. Then I'm going to elaborate further on some of the topics I touch on there. So hopefully you guys find this interesting. I've been getting great feedback from you guys in these videos so far. I really do appreciate all the love and support. Patreons, the subscribers, anyone who's just watching these videos. A lot of you have reached out to me as well, and it's all very meaningful. So hopefully, this is a little bit different, but I do think it's important. And so for those of you still here, I hope you enjoy. So to begin with, I've played this game since 2013. In fact, we're coming up on 10-year anniversary right now, as you can see there. March 30th, 2013, January 14th, 2023. So yeah, just about to hit our 10-year anniversary. And like many, I transitioned from the Diablo series and World of Warcraft, and I've never really looked back. In this time, I've had several careers. I've ended a couple long-term relationships. I've lived in multiple cities, and definitely had my fair share of ups and downs. The relationship I have with this game, though, is one of the longest standing in my life. And while that commentary might seem sad to some, I believe it's a testament to the product and its staying power. Not only to remain relevant, but to constantly evolve over the course of a decade. Through my time playing this game, I've raced. I even won a Demigods once, believe it or not. In fact, believe we still got that in A. There it is, the Parandus Demigods. Still in the remove only. But I know that probably surprises quite a few of you based on how I play now. A boss killed, I've speed farmed, I've min-maxed, I've hired out warrior, and I've done everything in between. As most people do over time, though, I gravitated towards an aspect of the game that I had habitual success with, and thereafter I developed a passion for, and that's the economy. It's through that lens in which I approach this discussion, and my ambition being that I might impart some of the lessons I've learned over this period of time and help demystify an aspect of the game that I feel like is often unfairly demonized. I believe this to be a matter of misunderstanding at large, and one that can be remedied not on the back end by developers or balance teams, but on an individual basis by fundamentally rethinking the way that one approaches this aspect of the game. I don't mean to preach, demean, or presume to tell any person what they should like or dislike. At the end of the day, guys, this is a game. If it doesn't bring you joy, regardless of what you're doing, it's time to walk away. However, I believe with an open-minded approach and willingness to alter certain pre-held notions or beliefs, many of the frustrations that are commonly echoed by people can be alleviated. In a great deal of these situations, I do believe as well that a new passion and vigor for the game can be found. Whatever outcome, if you have listened so far, I hope that this talk resonates with you, improves your gaming experience in some way, and I'll do my best to be cohesive and produce a clear narrative here. However, at times I might jump around a little bit. I apologize in advance. It's both the gift and the curse of a racing mind. So, at first, I want to talk about trading, crafting, currency acquisition, just on a base level. I know that this aspect of the game is much maligned and is seen by many people as somewhat of a necessary evil, or an inconvenience, or some sort of secondary element to the sort of hack and slash archetype that an RPG is known for, and that most people are drawn to. I believe that it's worth addressing prior to anything else that this notion, with respect to PoE, is just patently false. PoE has carved out its own sort of comprehensive niche within this marketplace, but we shouldn't forget the core aspects on which this game was founded, and that was that it had a wildly customizable and deep passive tree. I'm sure all of you remember what you felt like the first time you saw that monstrosity. The unique multifunctional skill gem approach, and that was coupled with, from the start, a currency system that was its own combatant against its inflation, by having a use case outside of representative wealth or just some sort of standard token for barter. And that was its ability to be used for altering or creating items in a countless amount of ways. The idea that floats around that people have that any kind of concerted effort put towards crafting or the acquisition of currency is somehow not actually playing the game is a false narrative. I think this is usually bred of ignorance, some kind of ulterior motives, or personal prerogatives, not fact. There are games wherein these systems do exist, and if you want to see what that kind of playstyle is like, I suggest revisiting Diablo 3 to see the longevity that affords. That being said, though, I think the first and foremost thing that you can do in this game, and this is a very important point, guys, is that you should set concrete goals, and more importantly, you got to be honest with yourself about your willingness to accomplish those goals. Nobody's trying to tell you how you should enjoy the game. That's a completely subjective matter, and any attempts on the contrary by myself or anyone else is purely foolish. However, you need to be able to separate the subjective lens in which you frame your experience with the facts of the game as they are. If you want to make a mage blood in 2 days, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to do that by killing monsters and looting items like, an RPG should be played. And if you hate trading, crafting, looking up probabilities, or calculated risk ventures, that's 100% your prerogative, guys. However, it does not invalidate the efficacy of those methods that you choose to avoid. An unwillingness to improve or look at that part of your game is a personal choice, but understand that if you're struggling to make currency in this game, it's because of your actions and your decisions. That's maybe a harsh truth, but the silver lining to saying that is that it's also within your ability to flip the narrative and take control of that financial future. I know that it's relatively easy to get wrapped up in groupthink or echo chambers that forums like Reddit or popular Twitch streams can produce, but you got to keep in mind that very rarely do these widely held notions produce anything but average results. If you find yourself trapped into playing, meta builds or forced into farming preset Atlas layouts, well, repeating the phrase "hideout is lava, hideout is lava, hideout is lava" 20 times a minute while you whirling blades around a map, hiding every item that drops because God forbid you waste a second to ID a most likely worthless rare. Maybe you should consider perhaps that for a second it's not trading, crafting, or playing the economy that's forcing you to interact with the game in a certain way, but rather that the conventional wisdom that you fervently ascribe to is leading you to this habitual sense of longing that's resulting in poverty and boredom. Now, with that covered, I think we should move on to the solution, or what I perceive the solution to be. Don't perceive this game as a binary option between one playstyle or the other. Approach both with a utilitarian perspective that aligns with your personal goals. Do you want to get to level 95 from level 93 today? Great, then let's do a map. You want to get a headhunter for the first time, but the price of the cards is going up faster than you can make currency in the early league? Well, maybe we should readjust our strategy then. Unless you're selling currency to a third-party RMT site, TFT, sorry, cough, producing content that's contingent on your ability to generate currency, or like me, you're just some asshole who likes linking mirrors in Global 1. There's no point really to endlessly generating wealth in this game. Just like there's no point running 5-ways or Chegula rotations once you're level 100. With that in mind, don't feel like any time that you've spent solely focused on creating wealth is a rabbit hole that you can never ascend from. But rather, it's a complementary playstyle to your desired gameplay that can help you achieve the goals that you set faster. In the example I gave above with the Headhunter, it's often one that I'm told early on in the league. And there's one major flaw in the approach that many people take, and that's that they allow their assets to stagnate or, worse, depreciate. This is the cornerstone, really, of all the advice that I'm going to cover here after, and it's really one of the most important things to adapt and to understand if you want to generate long-term wealth with regularity and ease. And that's that currency, with respect to how I frame it here, is just a loose term to refer to your relative capacity to barter for one item or another. We simply use currency in of itself as a universal way to measure that relative value. However, assets can be held in many forms, right? And very rarely are they going to be best held in currency outright. If I had 10 divines on Friday night, right, and I had to go away for the weekend, and I log out and I return to the game Monday morning, I'm going to log in with 10 divines. In all likelihood, the purchasing power of those 10 divines is not going to change, or it's going to change very little. But what we choose to do instead, through a rather formulaic, calculable, and easy set of steps, is constantly reinvest the money that we generate through traditional means, which would be stuff like mapping or bossing, and with the intention of outpacing the inflation that naturally occurs in every league. And we do this exponentially. If you could spend 10 minutes on an activity, right before you logged out on that Friday evening, that would assure when you came back on Monday that you would have 20 divines, would you not make that choice every time? Of course you would, right? And that's what we strive for, basically. But repeatedly and through many different means. Crafting, arbitrage, boss killing, corrupting, divination cards. These are all different methods by which we achieve this end. But with all things, the above and what I just said would remain universally true. And that's that our goal is to make our money work harder than we do. And eventually we get to a point that it's no longer an area of concern, but instead just a passive resource that allows us to play the game how we want. The strategies I'm about to talk about now are different ways in which we can accomplish this. So we're now going to go over the non-tangibles of trading. So a large portion of what I see to be habitually successful trading and crafting happens outside of the physical act of trading itself. There are some ways in which this is glaringly obvious to everyone, checking the trade site or PoE Ninja, going on Craft of Exile, reading the forums, staying up to date. But that's not what I want to cover here. Instead, I want to focus on the systems and behaviors that I think you can adapt or build towards that will have a huge positive impact on your profitability and frankly, your enjoyment in the long run, as well as ease some of that friction, as Chris loves to say, that's so caked into the economic activities of the game today. Now, this is probably, I think, the thing that is first and foremost, and that's establishing a network, okay? It doesn't matter if this is a guild, Discord, global channel, a forum, friends list, or even the stream. There is no economy in this game without player interaction. Much like the life expectancy of a human being who lives in complete isolation is dramatically lower than that of one living in a community, our ability to generate currency suffers without any type of support system. There's benefits psychologically as well to having a like-minded peer group who can help support your ideas and help you foster a sense of belonging and purpose. This on a motivational level is worth it in itself. However, the primary benefit within the context of what I'm saying is that you have access to capital in times of low liquidity or when economies of scale play a huge factor. Being able to have someone that you can run ideas by, who can provide feedback or help you split farm, is additionally useful. But there are very few greater annoyances in this game when you're actively participating in the market than seeing an item. Let's say it's a very valuable synthesis base early on in the league that you want to craft on. Um, that gets posted for far less than its potential value, and the window to purchase it as a result is going to be very small. But let's say you just spend 300 divines on a mage blood, and you have no raw currency on you in that exact moment, despite the fact that you could very easily just sell that mage blood and get 300 divines back in 10 minutes. Having a trusted peer in a situation like that can loan you that money just to cover your short-term needs is invaluable. Building trust with people like this can take time, guys, but it's worth it. You should always make sure you pay these people back. Always reciprocate if you're able. The long-term value of a network is worth way more than any single item is, and do not sacrifice your integrity with these people. I'll elaborate on the benefits of economies of scale shortly, but basically, in short, it's the probability times material. The probability times the material cost is going to be your average cost to craft or create something. And then when you look at the sale price or the desired outcome, those two things are often severely out of line with one another, simply on a cost accounting basis. Especially if there's some sort of uncommon technique being used. Now, if you can offset variance that would be experienced in a small sample size, like say something is a 1 in 6 or a 1 in 8 chance, right? If you're only doing it 6 times, there's not really a very high degree of calculability there. It's going to vary quite a bit because it's so small. But by bulk crafting or doing these attempts in a much larger sample, you can create a much more accountable or reliable expectation of return. This can get expensive though, right? So having a network to offset this is huge, especially when you're also able to consider the time that can be saved when you factor in things like division of labor, especially if different skill sets can be used. Some guy does delve, one guy does heist, one guy's a crafter, one guy gets essences, somebody's running harvests, one guy's buying divination cards. Obviously, one person can do all these things by themselves, but it'll take far longer and it'll cost a lot more because you're either probably going to temporarily spike the price of a supply market because you buy them all very quickly, or you're going to have to pay a premium to bulk buy them, right? And, this kind of goes without saying as well. Stash tabs in this game are basically pay to win. Nobody really ever brings this up, but it really does play a huge factor. If you notice, I have an absurd amount of... I actually have too many, in my opinion. And this is actually by virtue of when I started streaming, the only thing I could use my PayPal for was to buy stuff in the game. And I don't really care about MTXs, so I would just buy new tabs every time they got full instead of actually clearing them out. A little bit lazy, perhaps. But, yeah... the more you have, the more exposure you can have to markets, obviously. And as well, the less discerning you have to be with items, right? I think a lot of why so many items are skipped over is because, by and large, it's not worth the time for the average person to sit there and check each mod and see if there's value for it or trying to, decide if there's a build that could use that item. Part of this is something that's going to come with experience and time. Just sort of being able to flash your eyes at an item and know whether or not it's going to have some kind of value. I think one of the mistakes people make in that vein is that, they try to think of a specific build rather than, an archetype, right? You don't have to have something. When people ask, what build uses this? It's one of my questions that frustrates me the most. After number two to perhaps, is it actually going to sell though? But it's a bad way to look at crafting it, unless you're doing some very, very high-end thing. For example, a mirror craft for a specific build. But the lower value something has, the less specific you have to be about who can use it. If you're picking up a chest that has, this is obviously more geared towards the early league, but if you're picking up a chest that has, a high amount of life, couple resistances, and like suppression, you don't have to sit there and go check Ninja to find out what build is going to be using innovation. It's just, there's probably someone who can use this. And if you can just slide out to a tab where you don't even have to go look on Awaken Trade and just say, I'm going to dump this into a 20 chaos tab. Every 3 days, I'm going to lower that value by 5 chaos in the tab buyout. And if it gets down to 5C or whatever, floor you want to have, and it doesn't sell, great. Then you empty out the tab, sell it all to the vendor, and just cycle it around. The more stash tabs you have, this is going to be something that is, exceedingly easier than if you were to do so without any. My personal suggestion for anyone that is really trying to focus on the economy is that you have at least 10 of these. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is third-party applications. They're a fairly ubiquitous part of PoE. They're useful tools. Use them to inform your decision-making process, but don't allow them to be the sole factor. Many of these things have flaws in design, and they're easy to cheese. Price fixing, for example, on Awaken Trade or on the trade site, and PoE Ninja, which informs excellence in terms of values. These are often outdated, and don't even get me started on TFT and the issues that are there. But experience will subconsciously steer you towards better decision making with respect to these things. But understand that self-reliance and having a raison d'etre, or a reason for your economic decisions, will force you to actually learn and understand why you should or should not do something. This approach, if habituated, will build upon itself. The knowledge gap is massive in this game, right? There's few greater investments that you can make than understanding the why of something is done. The how is reactive. The why is proactive. Become the fisherman, as some might say. And that brings me to my next point, which is, that you shouldn't really rely on anyone else for information. If you have a stance on something, that's great. Have a reason why. Citing a streamer, even if it's me, a YouTube video, or, a Reddit post, a soundbite, or something that you've heard regurgitated over and over again is not a reason. It's frankly intellectually lazy, and it's going to severely harm you in a multitude of ways in the long run. First, any strategy that you hear about is inherently suboptimal, as you're not going to be the first to market, obviously, and if you're hearing about it, someone else probably is too. Second, long-held notions become conventional wisdom, right? That's how that comes about. And these tidbits of wisdom might seem like universal truths, especially if you hear them repeated over and over. Good example is hideout is lava. But understand that the mass adoption or adoption of these things took time. And often in that period of time, whatever truth they may have held at some point is likely shifted into the gray or complete obscurity as this game has evolved. Furthermore, just from a logical standpoint, conventional wisdom cannot logically produce anything outside of conventional results. If you want to excel in this game, you have to be an outlier, and your mentality and your outlook is going to have to, reflect that. If you've seen the movie The Big Short, or if you're familiar with the author Mark Twain, they reference this there, but he's a great quote, and he goes, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And I think that's a very poignant way to kind of sum up the point I'm making there. Anyways, the best way to remedy this, guys, is to discover opportunities for yourself. There's a degree of this that comes from time played and experience. You're going to build upon your past knowledge, developing somewhat of a Rolodex of information that you can sort of access in the back of your mind over time. It's not exclusively available through that means, though. A lot can be learned in a short amount of time by just getting out there and trying different things. New builds, new archetypes, new different currency flipping or crafting strategies. These will inevitably lead to some failures, but don't get discouraged, guys. If you can see past those, understand that failure is going to be your best teacher, right? Persevering through this failure is what's going to cause you to succeed. Don't doubt yourself. You are learning, and that investment into self will yield far greater long-term results than any method of farming, crafting, flipping, etc. Even if the early phases are rough or seem slow relative to what others are doing. And that's another really important thing. Don't compare yourself in this exact moment to someone else, right? If you're watching a video of me doing something and you're sitting there in your first month playing the game, and you're feeling discouraged because you see that I'm making a mirror a day, and you're only maybe making a couple divines, and that disconnect is making you feel bad about yourself or thinking you're doing something wrong. That's a foolish stance. I've been playing the game for 10 years. I focus on this almost exclusively, and I played like complete no lifer hours, right? The conditions by which I've got to that point are completely different. Instead, look at yourself from the day before or the week before. Improvements aren't always going to be these large, singular events where you become 100% better as a player in a day. They're going to be small incremental things that you might not notice day by day, but if you go and look back a week or 2 weeks before, you're going to see these things, and that's a much better measure by which you should scale your progress, right? And again, don't doubt yourself. I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with in this game is a failure of confidence, right? People so often will tell me that they want to do something or they want to achieve something, and the first thing that they do is then list off reasons why they can't do it. And it's maddening to me. I'll be the first one to tell you guys, I am not particularly smart. I'm not particularly, crafty or clever, right? Like nothing that I do is something that, I feel like any kind of ownership or onus over. It's all pretty simple stuff, and anyone can do it. And I know that maybe, takes away from the use case for you guys listening to me, but it's the truth, right? I've just figured out a bunch of these things because I've done them over such a long period of time. But it's not like you need to have an incredibly thought-provoking brain or, be just switched on all the time, right? If you go look on a trade site and you see something's for sale for 10 chaos, and then you could buy it for 8, it's like the discrepancy there is not something that takes a rocket scientist to figure out. And those kind of inefficiencies, even though that's a very, sort of low level example, they exist everywhere. And again, the way that you're going to best be able to identify those is really just by going out, believing that, you can get there, trusting the process, and understanding that those small steps will build over time. And much like your investments will compound, so will your knowledge. So, don't sweat it, guys. But yeah. Anyways, another thing you got to do too is you got to test your assumptions. And it's also very important to be open-minded. Try to always be learning and understand that when somebody has a differing opinion, it's not always a point of contention or somebody trying to put you down, but it's an opportunity to understand the other. And again, as I always say, markets are dynamic. They involve multiple people, right? If you're so stuck in your ways that you can't perceive the game with any sense of empathy or compassion for how someone else might want to do something, that's going to work against your, that's going to work against your interest, right? This is important, right? And places like Reddit don't necessarily reflect the majority. Reddit is to currency acquisition in Path of Exile what, like Wall Street bets is to capital markets in the real world. Do not mistake an upvote or, a higher ranking on a stream count as a measure of validity. Engage sentiment with a grain of salt. Content creators, myself included, and particular ones that do so over video or any kind of non-live platform, typically are going to have a conflict of interest with your self-reliance or your ability to be self-reliant. A learned sense of helplessness provides them with a long-term client, essentially, right? Videos can be useful for posterity's sake, especially if they're just unveiling or revealing a certain technique, but rarely are they going to hold weight over time. It's also much easier to fabricate results with editing and ideal setups and off-screen manipulation. Streams are somewhat better for this, but you should also be approached with a cautious skepticism or optimism. It's fine to have either outlook going in, but, don't blindly believe everything you hear. Also, nobody understands everything in this game. Nobody is right all the time, and never ever trust someone who has an authoritative opinion on every topic or always agrees with you either. Consider what you're watching, what you're reading, and what you're hearing but confirm the assertions as best you're able before you act. There are very, very, very many well-intentioned fools in this game. And with that being said, we can talk about a couple of techniques now as well. These are more sort of overarching things. As I said, what's really of value anytime you are absorbing information from somebody who's produced content. First of all, it's important to consider the source. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but not all opinions are created equal. For example, myself, I've never played a minion build. I've never played a trapper build. I've never played a totem build or a mine build. To me, there's no appeal. No appeal in playing a class where when you scale up, you throw something and run around while other stuff kills it. To me, it's just antithetical to the whole concept of character improvement. Now, with that in mind, am I going to go talk to Gazi and sit there and tell him how minions, how to build a minion character? Right? I might have a little bit of information. I might have read something here or there. But no, I'm not going to, because it's not my place. Right? And, in the same token, there's a lot of people who make content, especially around stuff with currency in this game, because I think it's probably pretty clickbaity, or can probably draw a large audience, who have absolutely no idea, and I don't mean to swear here, but they're fucking clueless, right? And it's fine to listen to that and to take the opinions of one person, but don't necessarily weigh things on an equal scale. If you started playing a month ago and you ask me a question, and I tell you it, and your immediate reaction is to either argue or be contentious and say why you think it's a different way, either don't ask the question to begin with, because it's, the implication is that you want to gain information, not start an argument, but also too that, if you need to ask a question to begin with, the opinion that you probably have at the moment is one that is invalid anyways. And this is not targeted at anyone specifically or with a situation in mind, but I find that a lot of people get sort of overly emotional about stances they have in this game, right? And it's hard to let go of certain paradigms or thought processes, especially if they're kind of deeply ingrained and built over time. But that's where that open-mindedness comes into it, right? If you can accept that, we're flawed as people, myself included, there's so much of this game I don't know. And if you're willing to take, the advice of someone who maybe knows better, that's going to be a huge asset. Build and build upon your knowledge, and you will never, ever fail. So with respect to the techniques here, what I would describe a technique as, again, is an approach to the game, or approach to doing something. And I would differentiate that from a strategy, as like a strategy is the implementation of a technique. For example, a technique would be, let's say, item level restricting something to craft it, right? So, and a strategy would be, for example, buying 8 passive, 10% attack damage, item level 50 to 67 cluster jewels, using serrated fossils on them for a 1 in 54 chance to hit feed, fuel, and martial, right? Feed the fury, fuel the fight, martial prowess, for anyone looking into that specifically, right? So the first part is, again, an overarching technique, and the second part is the implementation of that technique, which is what I would call a strategy. Now, again, anytime you're watching any one of my videos or any kind of video in this game about crafting or currency generation, try to focus on the technique, because the strategy is typically what people are going to flood towards. But the technique, or understanding, again, the why, not necessarily the how, but the why, is really what's going to separate you from other people. And now another thing, too, is calculated risk and how that differs from gambling. And the difference between the two, best analogy I could give is, it's the difference between walking into a casino and throwing down your chips on red and actually being the casino, right? The house always wins in a casino because of favorably weighted net outcomes. Roulette, in that example, pays 35 times your bet if you guess the right number, but the wheel has 38 numbers on it. Over time, you cannot lose as a matter of mathematical certainty. And in this spirit, we approach crafting. Decisions in this game are either going to be informed with data with the consideration for net positive outcomes, or they're not. The first option, that's a calculated risk. The second, a gamble. And next thing we're going to talk about are economies of scale, right? Economies of scale is something I mentioned a little bit earlier. But in short, the more that you do or you make of something, the greater the return, right? In the real world, this would be something that, for example, had a very high fixed costs, say setting up a factory to produce t-shirts, right? All the machinery and all these things, right? If you just make one t-shirt, you're going to have all that cost at the beginning, right? And so the cost that one shirt would have would be very high. However, if you make 100,000 shirts, obviously there's going to be those variable costs with, the cotton or whatever material it is that increase. However, those fixed costs are going to get eaten over the large amount of product you're producing. And we can do the same thing in PoE basically. Typically, however, we're going to do it to offset variance as well. We're going to use it to consume superfluous currency. For example, a really good one actually, a really good example, the flask crafting video we did the other day, right? If you're trying to craft like a diamond flask and you want to get increased effect and T1 crit chance, right? If you only have one diamond flask and you are heart set in your mind to go to get those mods, it's very, very likely that you're going to roll over a bunch of sellable flasks because you have that, that kind of narrow lens or horse blinded view of what you want. Now, conversely, if you have 20 flasks, you can just sort of move along each one, right? The material cost and the probability of you actually getting that desired outcome is going to be the same. But because you've increased the amount of production you have, you're going to end up making much more money. And another great way to look at it too are things that have a very, very favorable net outcome, but they have obviously some element of risk to them. What comes to mind for me is double corrupting exceptional gems, for example. Now, if you know it's a 1 in 4, right? But if you're to hit a +1 on a gem that has a 1 in 4 potential outcome to become +1, and that +1 gem pays off 8 to 1 or 10 to 1, I mean, that right there, if you do enough of them, you know that your outcome over time is going to be one where you profit, in that situation 100%, right? Or 150%. Now, the problem is that if you just do one gem and one double corrupt, obviously that's a pretty binary situation. But if you do 100 of them, different story. 100's a bit of an extreme example. But again, there's lots of things in this game where the more you scale something, the more, not entirely deterministic, but the more calculable that outcome will be. And again, you can scale this pretty much throughout the game, right? The flask crafting example that I gave first, that's something you could do with 20 chaos worth of currency. Now, if you're talking exceptional gems like Awakened Enlightens, that's going to cost you several hundred divines. But there are different ways that you can do that and scale that everywhere in between. Another thing that we're going to do as a technique is invest into pattern behavior. So what I mean by this is we're going to make a purposeful choice to defer short-term character improvement, particularly in the early league, to purchase items that have historical, mid or late league value because of when they're adapted by most builds. So we're going to be buying these things before their optimal use case, and therefore before their highest demand, and that's going to net us huge profits. And this is sort of, I mentioned this in the other day in the video that I did when I was talking about value curves on the XY axis with time and price, and on term with respect to how you can hedge, short-term risk. But basically, one of the questions I'm asked pretty much every day is, how do you get started early league with a lot of currency? I'll just give you again one example here because I don't want to go into too in depth, but if you think about what does the average person want the second they get to maps, aside from the maps themselves, the build enabling uniques, right? Then the 6 link, the gem levels, right? And then, et cetera, et cetera. But, 85% of people, 90% of people pretty much go through the same formula, right? What do people usually get around level 90? Their first cluster jewels, right? Well, what do people do once they're around 95? Okay, well, now they've got a couple divines. Maybe, maybe they're going to craft a weapon or something like that, right? But again, and this is just through the lens of the first few days of the league, but you can apply this to at any point of the league. If you know that, people are going to be around level 70, 85, kind of in that range, and that they're going to be going after, 5 or 6 links or unique items that, enable their build, or like level 21 gems, especially if it's a spell build, or, a chaos skill like Caustic Arrow or something. Is it a good idea for you to buy that right then? I mean, maybe. If you're playing at a pace like Havoc and his team, right? But again, when we're setting goals, what did I say was the most important thing? Being honest with yourself. People, I think, especially in the early league, have like this diluted sense of grandeur about their own abilities, or their own capacities, and they watch these people who are the best racers in the world, who have played for 10 years, and think that the way that they're doing or what they're prioritizing applies to them, and it really isn't the case. I don't need a 6 link 12 hours in the league when that's going to give me a 5% improvement in clear speed. However, that 6 link costs 2 divines, but if I wait literally 48 hours, it's going to cost 5 chaos, right? Now, if again, that people are going to have these singular focuses in terms of what they're going to want, and you can look at this at phases, right? So if you're to break the league down, let's say into phase 1, 2, and 3, right? So typically each one representing a month. What are the items that people are usually getting in the first month? What are people usually focusing on the second month? What are people usually focused on in the third month, right? And if you can anticipate these needs, and it's really not difficult to do this, any basic level of understanding of the game, some inductive reasoning, and if you really want to, if you really want to measure it specifically, you can go look at past league data. But you can just buy those items that are upcoming, hold on to them for a very short amount of time, and then rather than buying them at their optimal use case and therefore their highest price, you're going to be buying them when nobody's thinking about them, and then you could sell them at that time. And when you do that, then you can buy those other items that everyone else got before. Because guess what? They're going to be at their lowest price now because everyone's moved on from them. And that inverse relationship is really the crux and the core of what we kind of focus on with everything that we do. And it's why, if you've ever watched me stream, when I was on Twitch, I basically never run out of currency, because I constantly am putting money back into things that I know we're going to pay essentially a dividend over time. And once you get lots of those going, it snowballs to a point that you don't really have to worry about anything anymore. To give a specific example, I'll give you 2 of them. Those item level restricted cluster jewels I was talking about, right? Heist is something that people do a lot early league, right? They do it to generate currency, and they can do it while they're leveling. And the highest that these heist contracts are going to is item level 67. Perfect, because guess what? We want jewels that are between item level 50 and 67. Now, obviously, delirium is one of the things that can pop up a chest in these heist contracts. So because of this, there's going to be literally hundreds, if not thousands, of these cluster jewels available in the market. And they're going to be 1 chaos, like literally, and I'm not being hyperbolic, they'll be 1 chaos each. Now, you could choose to buy a divine orb and maybe a 6-link for, let's say it's 120 chaos. Or you could buy 120 cluster jewels. Now, why are these cluster jewels so cheap? Well, because everyone's level 65. Who's got the points for a cluster jewel and they're level 65? But what happens in 2 days? Those same people are level 90. And guess what they need now? Cluster jewels. Guess what they don't need? 6-links. Now, that 1 divine you spent on that 6-link, you can go get the exact same thing for like 5-7 chaos. And those cluster jewels, guess what? They're 20 chaos each now. And you've got 120 of them. Right? And that might sound like an extreme example, but it's not, and it's a literal one. And guess what? Those cluster jewel bases, they go up through the whole league. They're like a divine each right now. You could literally, 1 divine spent early on, we're halfway through the league, would literally be half a mirror now. And the opportunity cost of that was you deferring getting a 6-link chest for 1 day. Right? There are dozens of examples I can give on this. Tempering orbs are another one. Right? Tempering orbs are more popular early league because as soon as people start crafting their weapons, the higher end ones at least are going to use those. First couple days, again, because of heist, you get them for like 25 chaos. There was one league, I think it was 3 leagues ago, actually, where I knew I was able to play for the first weekend, but I had to go away for a week after that. I put every set that I had into tempering orbs. I bought them for about, I think it was 27 chaos each. I got like 45 of them. Came back a week later, and I sold those same 45 for a mirror. So by playing for the first 3 days of the league, I was like level 69. I made 1,000 chaos, primarily through chaos recipes. And 1 week later, I had a mirror. And it was simply because of that principle. So I can't stress it enough. And there are near infinite ways to do this. But try to look at things through that lens. And it will really open a ton of doors for you. And then another thing, too, is, the meta. The meta is a term that is thrown around so often in PoE. And I've already expressed my qualms with the kind of learned sense of helplessness and lack of individuality and sentient thought that the community by and large has. But the meta is kind of a misnomer in this game, I think, a bit, because I think it has this sort of subtext to it that if you're not doing something meta, you're doing something weird or wrong. And with respect to crafting especially, this actually isn't always the case. Now, that's not to say you could definitely make a lot of money crafting towards meta builds. They're going to be high volume, high liquidity, but the margin's probably going to be a little bit lower because, again, with that high visibility is going to come a high supply from a lot of other people trying to do the same thing. Now, another thing that a lot of people don't consider, though, is to just go the completely opposite direction and craft away from the meta. And when I say craft away from the meta, I mean find something that you're somewhat familiar with, right? So for me, it's Discharge. I love fucking Discharge, right? I've played it for 10 years, probably over 20 different leagues, know it inside and out, right? Do many people play Discharge? No. But guess what? No one crafts for it. Even if there's 5 people playing a build, those 5 people that are playing something that's kind of off-brand or off-meta, especially if it's really far out there, they're usually going to be doing that for reasons that, don't operate within the same system of a rational consumer where they look at things purely on the basis of like cost accounting, right? If there's 500 claws that are out on the market with a very common strategy that everyone knows are being used for like lightning strike or whatever is popular at the time, those are going to have, some sort of window of return on the basis of how much they cost to craft. But if you have something that applies to an obscure build, like something like Discharge, say there's 3 or 4 people playing in a league and there's only one of those items available, you can pretty much set the price that you want. Because the people that are playing that aren't operating with the same motivation structure that you are, and they just don't have the alternatives, right? And so, again, there are benefits to both, but what I'm willing to stress here is that, expand that perspective, because there are benefits and downsides, obviously. When you're crafting away from the meta, it's not going to be a high volume, high liquidity market. It's probably going to be an item that you might have to sit on for a week, 2 weeks even, right? But you can make like 100 to 1 on these things, right? I've literally bought pairs of Death Store before for, I think, 30 chaos that I've sold. I sold one of them last week for 95 divines after. I bought it for 40 chaos because I put +1 endurance charge on it. And it was the only one. That was the reason. Somebody needed it, and it was the only one. Now, I would say that if you're going to go for that off-meta approach, do so from a place of understanding with respect to what you're crafting towards. If you're a brand new player and you have no idea what you're doing, like, don't go out there and, like, throw up like a Thorns stun block avoidance chest and be like, yo, there's nobody matching on fucking PoE trade. Like, boy, about to be balling. That's not going to work, right? I'm not saying craft intentionally bad items, but if you've played something before that's, maybe a little off the beaten path, don't hesitate to craft towards that. And as a secondary benefit as well, if it doesn't necessarily sell that quickly, maybe it's a build you're playing, right? And you could just use the item yourself, right? You can post it on a forum post on the trade site, and you can still have your items listed while they're equipped. I actually think that's something that a lot of people are unfamiliar with, but it's how, for example, 15 divine sale. All of my mirror items are equipped, right? But they're still up on the trade site because I have a forum post with them listed. So, if you're crafting something that's super off meta, especially if it's for a build you're playing, fuck, that was a quick. Yeah, you can, again, you can ride out basically uh, that you know hole in your wallet that that item might be taking otherwise, by using it itself. You don't have to, but just a possibility. Now, another thing I want to talk about here too, moving on from that, is price, value, and when to sell. This is definitely the most experienced contingent element of trading, probably the hardest to master, and really the one that's going to vary the most person to person. But you got to consider that value is not a hard metric, and it shifts with the passage of time and is completely subjective. Price is not everything as well. Right? Selling an item, especially a niche one, may not be a matter of how you've priced it. Uh, if it's a situation like I was just talking about, again, this hypothetical discharge character, and it's a one of a kind item, right? If I've got it priced for 50 divines and it hasn't sold after one day, me lowering that item to 40 divines isn't likely to increase the market demand for it. It's just that you're going to have to wait for that one person to come by, right? So exercising patience can be really key in situations like that. But at the same time, the opposite side of the coin is true for items that are of higher liquidity, right? Things that have a relatively narrow window in terms of value are often best sold quickly, even if you're taking a little bit less money than looking for the absolute max peak value for it. And this is by the nature of you know, sorry, this is because of what compounding our rates of return can do. So let's say, for example, you craft a cluster jewel with 35% increased effect and you fracture it, right? And you think you can get, let's say, 45 divines, uh, because there's a couple posted below that, but you've seen some sell at that point, or you could just go lowest on the market and sell it for 40 divines. And in the first situation, it's going to take 2 days, 3 days. But the second situation where you're the lowest on the market, you could sell it within a couple hours, right? Now this is going to depend on your liquidity. If you've got hundreds and hundreds of divines, it doesn't matter. But assuming not everyone is cash flush all the time, it's often going to be better to take that lower value so that you can keep that money moving, right? Especially if it's something that's a high ticket item, that could then allow you to do a bunch of different crafts, right? If any of you ever watched me stream before, you'll notice I'm pretty liberal when people offer on items because I craft so much and so often, and there's typically such a high margin or profitability in an absolute sense on the items I'm making. If I know something craft, like let's say it's this amulet here, right? If I know the market value on this is 12 divines and somebody offers me 10, I'm going to take that 10 divines because I know for a fact this cost me 3 divines to make, right? So especially if I don't have a lot of raw currency in me in the moment, which I think actually right now I don't, right? I'm severely limited by what I can do with one divine, but there's a lot that I can do with 11. And so the fact that I can get that cash immediately versus potentially having to wait a day or 2 days, it is something you should consider, right? I'm not saying that one situation is better than the other. Obviously, you got to be somewhat discerning based on your circumstances. But don't necessarily think that A, you always have to get the best price, or B, that you need to lower the price, right? Think about who is trying to buy that item. Think about the market presence and try again to empathize or be compassionate for, put yourself into the shoes of the other. And again, that's why those dialogues and those conversations with people you don't agree with are very important. So you can try and understand that psychology a little bit better. All right. So this has gone a lot longer than I thought it would actually. And I know we've gone down a couple of rabbit holes here. But I think I touched on a lot of the points I wanted to. One of the biggest things I really want to stress again too is that, you know, this is a game, right? I love it. I know a lot of you guys love it. I have a deep, deep passion for it. I've never understood the idea that, it's common for people to play for 2 weeks and then quit and come back 2.5 months later. And, these are thought leaders of the community. Yet these are the same people that criticize, the style of play that I have. Well, it's like, well, if I can play every league for 3 months and enjoy every minute of it and, you burn out after 13 days because you play the same thing every single time, and yet the thinking is that I'm doing something wrong, or I'm the other. I think that's a backwards way of thinking. And again, I don't look at it through that comparative metric, but at the same time, you know, if you put too much weight into what you think others have told you to believe, um, I think you're pretty much setting yourself up for failure and unhappiness, right? And that also pertains to your goals. I know most people have similar goals in this game because there's universally good items, but say you want to make a mage blood, right? If that's your goal, sick. Let's develop a plan to get there, right? Every single one of you can accomplish anything you want in this game as long as you are honest with yourself about your willingness to get there, right? And don't sway on that. You know, uh, there's that old story about the kid in the forest with the horse or whatever, and he's scared because he can't see his whole way through, and they just say, "Can you see your next step?" Yes, we'll take the next step, right? I think that people can get bogged down with the long term picture, and it can be overwhelming at times thinking about, oh my god, this guy's got mirrors, or I've only got 3 divines and a mage blood's 300. How am I ever gonna get there? It's Don't worry about that. You know what that big picture is. You know what you're working towards. You can set little small steps, and those are far more important because those will become habits, and those habits will again start to snowball, and things will start going in your direction far quicker than you could ever really imagine. You know, don't look back. We're not going that way, right? Like, once you set your mind to something, anyone can accomplish anything. Um, just get rid of that self doubt, right? Uh, Make sure that you're being honest and when you're introspecting and deciding what you want. If you're not enjoying the game because you're playing a build that some streamer told you was a really good league starter build that's great at farming, but really all you want to be doing is playing, like a, I don't know, Cock Forbidden Right. Go play Cock Forbidden Right. There's nothing that's more important than this game than your ability to follow through with the things that you say. You know what I mean? Like, not follow through the things you say, but like, if you know something's going to take 20 hours of farming on a really optimized build and you hate every minute of it, or it's going to take 30 hours on something like you thoroughly enjoy, I would suggest always going for the second option. Because, again, A, it's a video game, but B, you'll start to resent the things that are done, out of spite, especially if you're only focused on that outcome. Um, because things in this game can change very quickly, right? If you're playing a farming build, or if you're doing Crimson Temples with all of this heavy amount of investment, ooh, another quiver sold, um, and you don't get an apothecary card, that disconnect or that dissonance between your expectations, um, that is, I think, what drives a lot of people's bitterness about the game. Whereas very rarely have I met someone you know um who's playing something that like they absolutely love, right? Because to them it's not a chore. It's like the journey is more important than the destination. And I think that a lot of people again can get really, really too attached to outcomes more so than to the process. And as I mentioned earlier, the process is incredibly important, whether you succeed or not. Which one is it here? Tempest Arrow, sorry. Um, because, succeed or not, those are the situations you're going to learn in, right? So I guess basically to sum it up, guys, set goals, be honest with yourself about what you want, and once you do decide that, you know, decide how willing you are to get there, and based on those parameters, set a plan. B, don't listen to what other people say, and don't necessarily compare yourself to anyone but who you were the other day before. Focus on your own improvement. C, be willing to fail, learn from your mistakes, and keep moving, right? Don't dwell on failures. You know, it's like this, like the gambler's fallacy, right? Every time something's going good, people have a system. Every time, you know, something goes wrong, well, fuck it. The game's broken RNG, goddamn streamer RNG, and this is why I hate the harvest gamble so much. You know, understand that you're in control of pretty much everything you do, for better or for worse. And all of you guys, whether you're on your first day of the game or your 10th year like I am, can accomplish anything you want. I know I didn't go into too many specifics that, you know, maybe are helpful here for those of you that are just coming for those techniques, but I think that this is a really important base thing to understand for the game, and to really have some kind of internal dialogue about. You know, too often I think we're disconnected from what we actually want because, you know, when you actually think about it, we're kind of reactionary and just sort of automatons following a path that we didn't really decide. Um, and I know for myself, that's why I always love the game, because I just do what I want, you know? I identify any rare that I want in any map. You know, I'll go die 10 times in a map. I'll take 45 minutes to go farm a map layout I don't like. Sit there IDing every amulet that I want to because I can make money in my hideout and I map for fun. You know, somebody comes in, tells me that, you know, I'm a shit player because some YouTube video they watched told them that they had to be efficient all the time. Cool, man. Do your thing. I'll be here in 3 months. You know, I go to message that guy 2 days later and they've quit the league because, you know, GGG's run by idiots. Not the case. So, again, experience the game for yourselves, guys. Sorry for dragging this on a lot, but I think that there's a lot of things there that, you know, need to be unpacked and need to be taken in. The question I've been getting asked a lot has been, you know, how do I decide what I want to craft, or, you know, what are the precipitating steps that, you know, lead to these decisions? And before I actually look into any of these things, the mentality or the psychology of what I'm saying really underlies all of it. So I hope this was helpful, guys. Again, long video. It didn't mean for it to be this long, but hopefully you were able to take something from it. And as always, guys, feel free to ask any questions below. For those of you not in the Discord, check that out. And for those of you that have supported me on Patreon, thank you so much. You know, the way things are going with subs and that, I might actually be able to do this on a semi-regular basis, which is, you know, a profoundly cool thing for me because, goddamn, I love this game. And it brings me a lot of joy to be able to help you guys. So I'll see you soon. The next video will definitely be one where we're focusing more back on those actual hard strategies. And again, just to follow up on what we did at the beginning of the video there, total invested 30.1 divs. And as I mentioned, we hit, let's see, 30, 35, 43, 46. So yeah, we made 16 divines on that little thing there. If any of you are curious, Anomalist Tempest Shield for a 1 in 6 chance for Divergent. Anomalist Precision, we're buying it at Divergent for a 1 in 6 chance to hit Anomalist. We were buying Divergent Defiance Banner for a 1 in 6 chance to hit Anomalous Defiance Banner. And we were buying, as I covered in a previous video, Divergent Divergent Tornado Shot for a chance at a 2 in 7 chance at Anomalous. So I'll see you guys soon. Hopefully this video was helpful for some of you guys. And looking forward to the next one. Or chatting you guys on Discord. Happy hunting. Good luck out there, Exiles.